And one of the things that was discussed last week with the federal government officials was on the need to expedite the process of establishing an interim arrangement. And banking services were supposed to have been restored a long time ago, but other than physically opening the gates of the banks, banking services have not been there. But in our most recent engagement, we were able to convince the federal government that banking services should not wait until the establishment of an interim arrangement. In fact, they have already begun sending physical cash to Tigray. Today, I know banks have already started providing services with the first consignment of cash having arrived in Mali yesterday. We'll hopefully see more activities. Air transport services have been restored, but still there are all kinds of encumbrances when it comes to the smooth implementation of that part of the agreement. There are all kinds of obstacles to air travel, especially from Magala to other parts of the country. In fact, the excuse that was given to us was that there were some security concerns, but we have had our own informal discussions on this issue, and I think things are improving, and the number of flights have increased since yesterday. The most problematic area is the fact that no commercial traffic has been allowed to Tigray since the signing of the agreement, especially the neighboring Amhara region remains very hostile. The Amhara region is often characterized by the proliferation of all kinds of armed gangs, and tax collection has essentially been privatized, and that is not a good sign. And we have raised this issue with the federal government, and then it is incumbent upon the federal government to see to it that such hostile activities that are standing in the way of the flow of commercial traffic to Tigray should be addressed, and addressed in a manner that satisfies the demands of the people of Tigray. This remains to be challenged. We still have to do an inventory of the kinds of provisions of the Pretoria arrangement that have been achieved, and the provisions that have yet to be carried out. By that, we've been trying to narrow whatever gaps there have been with formal and informal engagements that we have had since Pretoria. And at this point, I would like to thank Mike and his government for their principled position, although it's been very difficult when it comes to, as Ma'bel rightly pointed out, the African Union likes to punch above its weight. And we're not particularly excited about the kind of role they have been playing. Of course, in any African environment, the role of AU cannot be discounted and should not be discounted. But to say that everything that has been done was achieved by the AU requires a bit of a stretch. In fact, if it wasn't for the kind of support that Mike and his government and even the UN have done, I don't think the AU itself would achieve much. But we'll continue to engage the AU. But it's also our hope and expectation that with the need to not only restore services but also to undertake the rehabilitation and reconstruction of war-ravaged Tigray and other parts of the country, the role of an international community cannot be more emphasized at this point in time. And whether they like it or not, the federal government have to grapple with the fact that the role that the international community will have to play needs to be underlined, and then to just continue harping on the same string that African solutions for African problems. Well, that mantra is very much repeated again and again, but whether we like it or not, there still is a room for the international community to play. That would also include ensuring accountability for the implementation of the agreement, ensuring accountability for whatever crimes that have been committed over the course of the 2 or 3 years of conflict in Tigray. Accountability is not just about of the federal government, but also other entities that have been involved in the war in Tigray. Yes, there is a role for the international community. I personally believe that there are certain things that we have achieved. There are certain things that still have achieved, but the fact that there is a deep running mistrust amongst between our two sides is something that should blame for our failure to achieve all the results that we should have and could have achieved if we continue to implement the agreement in that was good phase. But continued engagement has also helped in narrowing the confidence gap, the trust deficit, and it is my hope and expectation that with more engagement and with more willingness on the part of the two sides to make some kind of leap of faith, then we'll be in a position to address whatever challenges we continue to face.
Thank you for shedding light on what's happening on the ground. That was very informative, and I'm pretty sure a lot of our viewers and a lot of the people from the diaspora are tuning in and hearing directly from you on what's happening, what can happen, and how we can all collectively work together towards a better Horn of Africa. So the next question is for Faisal Roble. From what I've observed, the question or topic of nation and nationalities and multinational federalism is not being discussed enough. Most communities in Ethiopia have shown their support for multinational federalism, albeit that outlook has been overshadowed by massive violence and alt-right nationalism in the last couple of years. From an authentic Somali perspective, can Ethiopia enhance, establish, or salvage a multinational democratic federal system of governance? And can you provide highlight on the deep-rooted inequalities in representation and resource distributions?
Thank you very much, Hafsa. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Mabel and Michael and Mike Hammer, whom I officially cited in an article as the most effective envoy in the Horn of Africa. So I'd like to say that in public. I also like to thank Getachew, who really joined us today, while he's fighting some cold, and very much respect that. I think the question you are asking me is probably the essence of what's wrong with Ethiopia, or why Ethiopia is having some of the challenges that we see. It's a historical issue, it's a sociological issue, it's a political issue. Ethiopia has missed several opportunities to address the issue of nationality and democratization. I think it has not gotten a model or a formula to really address that issue. There are forces within the Ethiopian political landscape who still believe that Ethiopia is or has certain structures and certain modalities, and they like to continue that. I think in the past we used to talk about the Abyssinian dominance. When I say Abyssinian, Amhara, Tigray dominance of the Horn of Africa's politics, particularly Ethiopia. I think that has been shattered. I think like Somalis, like Afaris, like Sidamas and what have you, Tigrays have always also been part of the oppressed, except that 30 years that TPLF was a major player in the political scene. That has also been changed with the 2.5-year war that really killed the largest number of civilians in the entire probably African continent, as far as we know, if not only Ethiopia. I think there are forces still that are still denying the Ethiopian democratization to take roots in the form of multinational democratic system. As you know, the existing constitution calls for that, but some political forces that are powerful, that have been connected through historical means with the West, have really sold the idea that the Ethiopian constitution promotes ethnic violence. And that is a sellable idea to the West, because the West has always been struggling with issues of inclusion or lack of inclusion for some groups, or even closing doors to some communities such as Black Americans, immigrants in Europe, what have you. So when somebody comes from the third world countries and completely trashes the idea of inclusion, they easily get it and they sell that idea. But those of us who know Ethiopia and who grew up there, who have lived experience there, I think probably ethnic federalism was the best thing that could have happened in Ethiopia if Ethiopia wants to go on and stay. The question is how you're going to really implement that ethnic federalism or multinational federalism, if you will. And I'm very well aware of the controversy in terms of meaning between ethnic federalism versus multinational federalism. Western sociologists always like to use the word ethnic, whereas most Black African intellectuals shy away from that and wanted to use nationality or multinational. So having said that, I think Abiy's regime had another opportunity that was missed by the EPRDF to really democratize Ethiopia under the federal system, where multinational issues are addressed. When Abiy came to power in 2018, as you know, that he addressed not only to democratize Ethiopian political landscape, but he also reached out to the Horn of Africa states and wanted to expand that message of democratization. But that did not hit the goal. So the question is, to come to your point, can we enhance multinational democratic federal system in Ethiopia? I think yes. And there are, I would say, 3 political players in the scene that can help. I think Western powers can help us to understand when we say multinational federalism, we are not saying we have to break Ethiopia up into pieces. What we are saying is that we need to expand the political space, create safe space for people to practice their rights at the regional level, as well as being included at the national level. So the Western role is very key. They have not been understanding so far what we say when we talk about multinational federal system, but I hope as we go into this peaceful era between TPLF and Ethiopian federal government, some of those ingredients can be added into the process. That's number one. The other political force is the multinational groups who have been crying for political rights for generations, be it Somalis, Oromos, Tigray, Sidamas, and what have you. I think their voices need to be put into the mix. So far, they are not. They are absent from the political discussion. When I say the Oromo, I'm not talking about the PP that has the power, but I'm talking about the Oromo who feel disenfranchised, like the Somalis, the Afaris, and others. Then the third party or political group I like to come with some sense is the Amhara elite. So far, we don't see a rational Amhara elite that's coming to the surface to really address, respect, and accept that notion of equal access to power, political distribution at an equitable level to all groups, both at the regional level as well as at the political level. I think the last time that the Amhara elite attracted masses towards their ideology was in the 1970s, for right or wrong reasons, when the EPRP appealed to the hearts and minds of youth throughout the country, whether they were Somalis, Oromos, what have you. That factor has been lost. The current Amhara elite have beat the drum for the war. They were the main forces that have really played a negative role in the war in Tigray. And up to this point, as Getachew touched the Amhara regional state, as well as some of the militia, are trying to kill the cessation of hostility, which in my opinion registered some major gains of course, frustration in terms of the pace at which things are being completed. But some of the elements in the cessation of hostility will go on for years, like the reintegration of the society and what have you. But the beginning so far is good. The very fact that last week the Prime Minister finally sat down with all the groups, the delegation that have been playing a role in the Pretoria peace agreement, in my opinion, is really a very major step that gives us hope that this peace deal would work. Having said that, I think there are some regional issues hopefully we will address when we come to the second part of this, which is the entire Horn of Africa, in my opinion, is exploding if we don't do some real positive work. And Mike probably is aware of what's happening in some parts of Somalia this morning and yesterday. That Las Anod is really ablaze with fire. People are being killed, for meaningless, issues. And I think when is an area in the Horn of Africa starts bleeding, as Mabel was saying, the rest could also share that bleeding. So we need probably at one point to take a totality to look at the whole issue. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you so much, Faisal. I know Ambassador Mike Hammer has another engagement soon. So I wanted to ask one question, and hopefully you can provide some remarks on this discussion and in general, with all the ongoing events in the Greater Horn of Africa. So one specific question, I know it's, again, this is a somewhat male-dominated panel, but I wanted to talk about something, very, very pressing. Mass rape and conflict-related sexual violence has devastated the women, girls, and communities in Tigray. Not enough reports or resources are addressing this nightmare. So, Ambassador Hammer, how would you describe the gravity of conflict-related sexual violence in Tigray and across Ethiopia? And what needs to be done to urgently address this? And how can civil society organizations like Mabel representing Tigray Action Committee and others be supported in their work of empowering people, especially the most vulnerable? So hopefully I know it's a loaded question, but hopefully you can answer that question and also provide your remarks before you maybe exit the discussion.
Great. No, thank you very much, Hafsa. I'd be delighted to address the question. Let me just first say thank you for inviting me to participate, with this distinguished group of panelists. And what I really appreciate is that I have an opportunity to participate in a woman-led initiative. So absolutely, we need to empower women and give women a voice. And I credit you for your efforts, and thanks to also the Minnesota Institute of the Horn of Africa Studies and the United Women of the Horn and the Tigrayan Action Committee. Let me just start by saying, as we've now hit the 3-month mark since the Pretoria Agreement was reached, that we really do need to commend those who were in Pretoria. And I see, obviously, Getachew Reda is here with us today, and then hopefully National Security Advisor Redwan, who was the lead negotiator for the government of Ethiopia, will participate in this call. But it's important that, as Getachew indicated, the guns have been silenced. And it is very important to remember that the name of the actual agreement is not the cessation of hostilities agreement, it's the permanent cessation of hostilities agreement. And by that, it is the United States' interest and focus to try to ensure that the agreement holds and delivers a lasting peace for the Tigrayan people and for all people in Ethiopia and for the affected other regions of Afar and Amhara. And I want to emphasize that we have supported African solutions for African problems. And while the AU obviously was in the lead, the United States is proud to have been able to contribute as an observer and be part of the negotiations, and continues to, on a daily basis, follow through to make sure that the implementation of the agreement is realized in the best interest of the people of Tigray and the people of Ethiopia. I will just say that it is heartening to hear from Getachew the progress that has been made and that continues to be made. And it is essential, of course, that all those who need humanitarian assistance are able to receive it. There's full restoration of services, and the progress continues to be made, that disarmament has begun. And certainly what we've seen with the the beginnings of the withdrawal of Eritrean troops to the border, critically important, but that also needs to include the withdrawal of other non-ENDF forces from Tigray, as was agreed upon in Pretoria as you move forward with further TPLF disarmament. But one of the issues in the lead-in to your question on sexual violence, which has been horrific, and we must all recognize that the last 2 years of war were devastating for Tigray and for Ethiopia, and that now that peace is taking hold, part of the agreement, Pretoria and Getachew Reda referred to it, is the need for accountability for those who have committed gross violations of human rights, for those who have been responsible for untold incidents of sexual violence, rape, and you can rest assured the United States will continue to support and be a voice to try to encourage that accountability is followed through. And that is something that we continually discuss with the government. Certainly, when Prime Minister Abiy was here for the African Leaders Summit and met with Secretary Blinken and our National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and as well as in a follow-up call that the Secretary had with the Prime Minister on January 21st. So we will continue to push for that. You will see recently Linda Thomas-Greenfield was in Somalia, and she's someone, or UN ambassador, who is a voice for women, but importantly highlights the issues of abuse of women and sexual violence that occur in war. And our Assistant Secretary, Molly Fee, will be coming to Ethiopia on the occasion of the African Union Summit that's coming up now in mid-February, and will also be, I'm sure, addressing some of these issues. So the United States and the Biden administration is fully committed to trying to develop a strong partnership with the people of Ethiopia to support their efforts to achieve a peace and prosperity, and to deal with some of these difficult issues that we've seen through this past war, but also to ensure that as we look forward, that there's not now a growing concern in Oromia, and that there are going to be now similar incidents to what we saw in Tigray happening there. So, our embassy team in Addis, led by our Chargé Tracy Jacobson, is very focused on all issues pertaining to all Ethiopians throughout the entire country. And so while today we're very focused on making sure the implementation of the Cessation of Hostilities Agreement delivers for the Tigrayan people, that you can rest assured the United States will remain fully engaged and wanting to be a partner. And I applaud the diaspora, those Ethiopian Americans who are trying to be a force for good and to promote really a better circumstance for many, many Ethiopians who are struggling today. And I'm proud also that the United States is the greatest donor and supporter of humanitarian assistance to Ethiopia, and you can rest assured that will continue. But the work is not done. We know that it must have follow-up, and that is my responsibility as Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa to remain fully engaged. And I look forward to my next trip to Ethiopia in the not too distant future, but also to continue to have these conversations and looking for solutions and looking for the positive. There's been tremendous trauma and suffering, but it's important to rebuild, and that rebuilding and reconstruction needs to take place, and that for that you are going to need the international community. So I appreciate the voices that I've heard today calling for greater international support to reinforce again the developments that need to take place to create again the conditions for a better future for all Ethiopians. Let me stop there. I can spend a couple more minutes, but then as you mentioned, I have a prior event. But again, I appreciate this opportunity, and each time I do events like this, I learn from you, and it's invaluable to hear the different voices and concerns, and I hope you'll always find that the United States is a friend, is a partner that will want to be engaged. We may not agree on all issues, but we certainly want to hear the various voices, and when it comes to empowering women, you can rest assured that we'll be there in support, and I look forward to more exchanges like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Mike Hammer, for joining our panel, and especially for those short notice and being supportive. Michael Rubin, you know, the Horn of Africa is changing in more ways than one. As a political analyst and a scholar, researcher, what are your predictions on what may happen, especially given the endless violence export coming out of Eritrea, the unrest in Somaliland, the underreported mobilization and fight against Al-Shabaab in Somalia?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the Minnesota Institute of Horn of Africa Studies. You know, we can always use some good quality discussion of different regions in Africa and Washington, D.C. And if it takes Minnesota to get us there, more power to it. Thank you for what you're doing. Look, I'm married to a Russian refugee, and she tells a Russian joke about the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. The Russian pessimist is the one who says, no, things have never been so bad. War, violence, the economy, the environment, they couldn't possibly get worse. And the Russian optimist is the one who says, no, they can always get worse. So unfortunately, I'm going to give a little bit of an optimistic outlook to what I see right now. During the course of the conflict, I had the opportunity to ask a question to an Ethiopian official, a cabinet minister, and I asked, what mistakes, looking back over the last year and a half at that point in time, do you see that President Abiy has made, or more like, I wasn't trying to get him to blame President Abiy, but what in internal discussions, is there any lesson learned? Is there any acknowledgement of how bad decisions had led to this point in time, to this violence? And I just got silence. I got the sense that at the very top within Ethiopia, there wasn't a willingness to have accountability, or at least a discussion about how Ethiopia had gone so far off the tracks and had become embroiled in this collective disaster, which has cost hundreds of thousands of lives, has displaced millions more, and is, I'm sorry, nowhere far from concluding. Because now that Pandora's box is open, it's going to be very difficult to close it, especially if President Abiy thinks he's won. That's the most dangerous situation. It's all well and good to have peace, but if he believes that the price is worth it, that's where we get further ethnic violence, state-centered violence against various groups into the future. What I'm worried about as well is, and I commend the Special Envoy Ambassador Mike Hammer, but as he knows, and I also commend, for that matter, the Biden administration, which from the very start has been very interested in the events in the Horn of Africa. President Biden is genuinely concerned about this. I'm saying this as someone who's politically opposed to President Biden, but credit where credit is due. He is sincere when it comes to this issue. That said, what I'm most concerned about, and this will get to your question with regard to the greater Horn of Africa region, is now that through the efforts of the State Department, through the efforts of the National Security Council, behind the scenes in discussions with the Kenyans, with the African Union, and so forth, we've gotten to this, well, I won't call it a peace agreement, but this truce. What I worry is that, and I say this as an analyst rather than an advocate, that the United States isn't going to maintain its focus. Once there is quiet, the attention in Washington, which traditionally has attention deficit disorder when it comes to national security, might move on in a different direction. I'm not talking about the Africa Bureau. I'm not talking about Ambassador Mike Hammer, who are very, very sincere. But I'm talking about getting to the 7th floor of the State Department, to the principals in the White House, and so forth. We need to make sure that we're not at the end of that Washington understands this isn't the beginning of the end. This really is the end of the beginning. Now, when it comes to African solutions for African problems, I understand the origin of this phrase. I've heard it from certainly people like Paul Kagame in Rwanda, certainly from the African Union, and so forth. But African solutions for African problems doesn't need to be an excuse to foist off what really is an international issue. Because if we want to look at African solutions for African problems, well, Truth and Reconciliation Committees, to make sure there is justice for the gender-based violence and the other crimes against humanity, We have, of course, precedents in South Africa. We have precedents in Liberia. We have precedents in Morocco and so forth. So there are African solutions that can be applied, not to push away interested parties, but to embrace the best practices. If we want to look at democracy, well, why shouldn't we look at countries like Botswana, South Africa, and say there's no reason why Ethiopia, and for that matter, Eritrea, shouldn't be judged by the same standards? I would urge the United States to call out the Eritreans directly. We're not talking about non-ENDF forces. We're talking about an Eritrean army which is illicitly on Ethiopian soil in a manner which is undercutting very much the security not only of Ethiopia, but the entire region. What we've learned is what happens in Ethiopia doesn't stay in Ethiopia. We've already seen blowback in Djibouti. We've seen blowback in Somalia, at least under the time of Mohamed Farmajo, with regard to the forced impressment and human trafficking of young Somalis who were sent to Eritrea for quote unquote training. The fact of the matter is we have a real problem there. Now, when I've talked to African leaders, one thing as an academic, I'm not a diplomat, I'll speak directly. One thing that is a problem that has impact beyond Ethiopia's border is the personality of Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed not only has a messiah complex, which still continues, but as other African leaders and people who have been directly in the room with him in a way where I have not, say, there's a way that African leaders talk to other African leaders. And there's a way that African leaders talk to their people. And they're different. Abiy Ahmed doesn't differentiate between the two, and therefore he tends to want to spin a lot of lines and a lot of falsehoods that might have their place in a public declaration, but shouldn't have their place if you really want to have peace between equals, or if you want to bring in others of your peers, other heads of state and so forth, other heads of government, in order to ensure that there is a broader peace. I worry that this personality flaw, this desire to maintain a personal power to not recognize mistakes, is going to lead to a situation that we've seen with other countries, including Isaias Afwerki, including people like Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, where in order to distract from failures inside a country, one whips up nationalist sentiment and either directs it against a minority in one's own country or directs it against neighbors. Ethiopia, because of the decisions of the last 2 years, has, let me put it mildly, it's failed to live up to its economic potential. And economic management is a very difficult issue. And I'm wary that the Ethiopian government is not up to this, and that the international community and the African Union don't have the attention span to ensure that we're not rewarding Abiy for the violence which has been perpetrated, but at the same time, we're not allowing that violence to become a distraction from much more serious issues that need to be discussed within Ethiopia. And that's the problem. And I say this in conclusion, that threatens to undermine the stability of the broader Horn, Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, Djibouti, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Rubin. That was, again, very, very informative. Mr. Getachew Reda, I would like to direct this next question to you. Hopefully you're still with us, and I'm happy that you are. I know you're not feeling too well. There are reports and conversations coming out of Tigray and even within the diaspora that there are efforts to block or hinder the documentation of acts of genocide and war crimes. Are these reports true? And what is the government of Tigray doing to support accountability and transitional justice, as you mentioned, you highlighted briefly earlier?
لو تغينا مسك نوفر لنا نفرح ابنا كنتبع لنا سبسي أي تفرح نحق فرح نزقيها فرح ኣለና